John.
There's this story that obviously is one that lives a bit with myth that has to do with Eisenhower supposedly meeting ETs, and I'm sure you're familiar with that story. So we feel as if that's a confirmed story, and that from there we can kind of see the genesis of the world that we have today in this. Or what's that story?
The story was, I believe it was 1956 or 57. The cover was that he was going to see a dentist, and in reality he was out near Muroc, California, where Edwards is today. And he was brought out there to have a meeting because the extraterrestrial people very much were concerned about our atomic and nuclear weapons. And they were wanting us to get rid of all those. And then in exchange, they'd help us get these new technologies out to, benefit humanity and the earth. The military-industrial complex, as he called it, did not want him to do that. Now, I have a document from the French Ministry of Defense and French intelligence from a man that they got that was at that meeting, an account. That's in the archive somewhere. And the reason I got it is that during President Nicolas Sarkozy, who was the president in the early 2000s of France, his MOD people reached out to me to get this information from us, but also to bring me to France to do a close encounters of the fifth kind, CE5 contact, we'll talk about later, where we make contact with these interstellars and invite them in, and they come. But in this exchange back and forth, we got this document, and I had heard that account from other credible sources. Now, the upshot of it, and this is where you bottom line this for everyone real quickly, to make a very long story short, the President Eisenhower wanted to move forward in a peaceful way with this. But the people who wanted to just get the technologies, keep it secret, and by then, remember, by 1956, 57, we had reverse engineered the energy and anti-gravity systems enough that we had man-made UFOs by 1954. And the result of that is they realized the industrial and financial hit that disclosing this would have, that it would give us a new world. But most of these industrialists were oil, big industries, smokestack industries, and those are the people that was the tail wagging the dog of the U.S. military and intelligence. So that collusion and corruption got full bore between the late 40s and the mid 50s. So Eisenhower was increasingly shoved aside. And I have a young man, and his testimony is in the archive, Stephen Lubkin. He was an attorney, but at the time he was a young man in the Army Signal Corps for the White House. And he knew Eisenhower, and Eisenhower told him he would doodle pictures of these UFOs and said, yeah, I've lost control of this. They won't tell me anything anymore. And that was in 1960. So in 1961, when he left office, right before Jack Kennedy came in, that's when he gave his famous beware the military-industrial complex because it become a threat to our democracy. He didn't say that because he was Abby Hoffman and against the military. I mean, he was a 5-star World War II hero general, right? And a Republican. But he had been burned and betrayed badly by this covert and illegal operation. And it was on his watch, and I'm blaming him because he just was, I understand he was tired and he trusted people intrinsically. But people like Alan Dulles and Paul Mellon and others circled their limousines and basically betrayed the president and the American people. And the rest is history. So it's been out of sync and a mess since, well, I was born in 1955, so it's been a mess for almost my entire lifetime. It also scares the shit, excuse my language, out of these people. It does. It terrifies them because, and I think that was one of the problems with many of the presidents, they reach a certain point where they realize, damn, this is real, and I don't have access. And when they start pushing on it, some subtle and then not so subtle threats come their way. Like, for example, George H.W. Bush directly threatened Bill Clinton when he started pushing on this. Now, I know this because I have someone on my team who's written us a little affidavit about this, but he doesn't want his name out publicly. but his statement is out there in our archive. So, and he was with Bill Clinton, and when Bill Clinton told this story. So, and Jimmy Carter famously said at a guitar signing ceremony to raise money for the Carter Center, I have a friend who was there, who's a world-renowned classical guitarist, who said that someone asked him, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And President Carter said, I wasn't that man. And there was a stunned silence. And they said, what do you mean? He says, well, there are certain things I had no clearance to know and had no control over. And someone giggled, making fun of the issue, and said, oh, you mean things like UFOs? And he said, yes, that and more. So that, if you multiply that dynamic from it started in the late Eisenhower years and continues apace to this day. Now, some presidents have known some information, some of them had known very, very little. And Reagan was read in enough to manipulate him into Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative, weapons and space thing. Trump was given enough information and mostly disinformation to flip him in a certain direction. Other presidents are told virtually nothing. So they do a psychological analysis to see if we can provide some of this information in a way to manipulate the decisions from the executive, the president. Same thing happens in Congress. So I've had a front row seat to this chicanery since 1991 and 92. So I think this is what the public has a very hard time understanding. You take your textbook from civics lessons in high school and college, throw it away, because that's a fantasy that doesn't exist.